there are roughly 10 to 11 million undocumented migrants living in the U.S. currently. If even a small percentage of that, let's say even 10% of that, move across the border to Canada, that's 1 million more immigrants. Do you think the Canadian system can afford to accommodate?
So that there's even a small amount, like a small portion of that, our system's really not capable of dealing with it. And then on the other hand, we don't really have the ability along the longest undefended border in the world to stop them. So this is going to become, I would say, in the next 6 months, potentially a very significant issue, maybe even the number one issue in the country.
Darrell Bricker joins us once more. He is a global CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs, and we'll be talking about the most pressing issues facing Canadians and Americans alike following Trump's recent election victory. Welcome back to the show, Darrell. Good to have you back.
Well, thanks for having me back on, David. I really enjoyed the last time we had a chance to speak, and it's great to be talking about Canadian issues specifically today.
We talked about last time how the population collapse is threatening the economies around the world, not just in Canada and the U.S. It's probably the most threatening issue facing the economy. People can visit that interview, link down below, and see what Darrell had to say about that. We're moving on from a longer-term trend and into a more immediate risk facing the economy, which is the topic of what could happen to Canada once Trump gets into office. So a lot of positives, a lot of negatives. Let's focus on some of the issues that Canadians care about the most. So I'll let you answer that more broadly, and then we can get on to immigration and some other things.
Okay, so when we actually, I just got some data about this today. So one of the most important issues as far as Canadians are concerned, the most important issues facing the nation today, number one is healthcare, which has moved ahead of inflation as the number one issue again. And really, this is about people having access to quality healthcare and whether or not they feel that they can receive it in a reasonable period of time. That's why that issue is there. Number two issue, declining, is inflation or the cost of living. But the most rapidly moving issue that we're seeing in terms of public opinion right now is concern about immigration, which, by the way, in Canada only tends to happen when the public perceives that there's a significant problem with the way that immigration is being managed. So we've seen the Prime Minister come out in a recent video talking about how he may have made a mistake, his government may have made a mistake in terms of how they've managed the numbers over the space of the last while. Based on these survey results, I think Canadians actually agree with them on that it has been managed not particularly well. But given, David, what we're seeing in the United States from the president-elect Trump about his desire to move on undocumented immigrants in the United States and start removing them en masse, the potential that there could be a rush at the Canadian border is definitely there. So if we've got Canadians concerned about immigration today because of the way that it's being managed, one can only imagine what it's going to get like if we do start to see another rush at the border.
So you're right. This is from the day Trump won the election. Articles like this popped up all over Canadian news. This is from the CBC. Canada prepares for a rise in border crossings with the threat of mass deportations under Trump. Donald Trump's promise to begin deporting undocumented immigrants as soon as he takes office in January has groups who work with newcomers preparing for a possible increase in new people making their way across the Canadian border. This is what Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had to say about immigration. This is from his own YouTube channel, published 2 days ago. Take a listen.
Now, it is time to make the adjustments to stabilize the immigration system that we need and get it working right for Canadians for right now. Immigration is primarily a federal job. We have the levers to rein it in, so we are.
This is a big change, a major cut to immigrations, reducing permanent immigration levels by at least 20%.
A new string of measures to clamp down on temporary immigrants. That means a decrease in international students, temporary foreign workers.
Canada's new immigration plan is straightforward. Lower the number of new immigrants coming into Canada, both temporary and permanent.
Okay, wait a minute. So this is a major change in policy from what he had a couple of years ago. As you know, he wanted to welcome and increase the number of immigrants. He even wrote about this publicly. Why the change now, or has this been something that's been in the works for quite some time?
No, I don't think it's been something that's been in the works for quite some time. I think it's a really kind of a last-minute move by the government here, in which they've finally woken up to the fact that people are not happy with what's happening on immigration. And one of the things in Canada that we've been able to count on, particularly since the end of the Second World War, is a pretty strong belief, particularly outside of the province in Quebec, that immigration is a good thing for the country. That's really become frayed over the space of the last 18 months to 2 years. And what you're seeing here is that the government now finally responding to this level of public concern. And where people are having difficulty with it is reflected in the other issues that I talked about. So now when people are starting to say, why am I having a hard time getting access to healthcare? Well, immigration is one of the drivers of that. So they feel, if inflation and particularly access to housing is an issue, so the cost of living and the amount I pay for rent or access to the type of housing that I feel that I should be entitled to in this country is challenged. Who's taking up that access to housing or causing this issue? Some people want to blame it on immigration, rightly or wrongly. So the government's moving on this because not only is it about immigration itself specifically, but it's also a driver of those other concerns that the public has.
There are roughly 10 to 11 million illegal immigrants or undocumented migrants living in the U.S. currently, as estimated by the Department of Homeland Security. If even a small percentage of that, let's say even 10% of that move across the border to Canada, that's 1 million more immigrants. Canada in 2023 already has or had in 2023 1.2 million immigrants from all over the world. Now, that accounted for 97% of the population growth in that year, or roughly 3% of the overall population. So how many more immigrants do you think the Canadian system, healthcare system, housing system can afford to accommodate?
Well, that's more of a technical question that I don't think I'm particularly well suited to answer. But I think in terms of the public opinion environment that's necessary to allow it, I think we're probably at our limit. And that's why you see the government taking the action that they're taking. Because, as I said before, Canadians generally are supportive of immigration, and they've definitely moved against it over the space, particularly in our polling in the last 6 months. And as I said before, I just got new polling data today now showing that immigration has moved way up. It's up 15 points from this time last year in terms of the level of public concern. And that's not because people are happy.
How do you anticipate the immigration system to change?
Well, it's going to be really interesting because there's a lot of immigrants that have been brought in. And when the government talks about accepting people as immigrants in the country, there's a lot of temporary immigrants, students and temporary workers that are in the country. They're going to be probably first in the queue, which means that people who are now thinking about coming over to Canada today are probably going to run into some pretty heavy backlogs in terms of their ability to get into the country. So maybe what we might start seeing is something similar to what we've seen in the United States, where we got a whole bunch of people starting to claim asylum status, either if they're crossing the border, maybe they're already here, or maybe they find a way to get into the country by airplane, because normally it's not just crossing at the border, but they find a way to get into the country and they claim asylum status when they get here. Given the level of backlog that we have in the Canadian system today in terms of processing people in that situation, you're going to be here for a long time before your case actually gets heard. So the amount of pressure that there is on the system that we've got in place for accepting immigrants and accommodating people, regardless of how they found their way into the country, is going to be really challenged. It's already really challenged today, David.
Well, okay, so the issue of, let's say, cutting down the number of international students, that's been in the works over the last couple of months. So suppose we have higher restrictions on the number of immigrants coming into the country. The question still remains whether or not the current number of immigrants, meaning people who came in recently, can still be accommodated with our current healthcare system, with our current housing system, the supply of housing, etc. So can you just forget the illegal immigrants coming from the U.S.? Let's just focus on the new batch of immigrants coming in currently. How can they be accommodated fairly? Is that possible?
Well, from a public policy perspective, we're already struggling, with the actual means to be able to do this, and not even just, the physical accommodation in the healthcare system and the physical accommodation in terms of housing, but even the ability to be able to screen people that are coming into the country and to be able to adjudicate whether or not they should be allowed to come into the country. All of those systems are under a tremendous amount of pressure. So that there's even a small amount, like a small portion of that, the U.S. government says 11 million undocumented migrants in the United States. I've seen estimates that could be twice that. If even a portion of that decides to make its way over the Canadian border, that our system's really not capable of dealing with it. And then on the other hand, we don't really have the ability along the longest undefended border in the world to stop them. So this is going to become, I would say, in the next 6 months, potentially a very significant issue, maybe even the number one issue in the country.
And this is going to potentially put strains on U.S.-Canadian relationships on a federal level as well, as the Canadian government perhaps struggles to contain this influx of deportation from the U.S. And they may put pressure on the U.S. to do something about it. How do you think this will affect relationships here?
Well, I don't see that we're going to get an awful lot of sympathy from Donald Trump on this question,
Yeah.
because he just wants them out. And if they're going to Canada, gets them out. Anything that would any sort of agreement to prevent them from leaving because of the effect that it has on Canada, maybe we might get some sympathy from the U.S. government. But based on the rhetoric that's coming out of the Trump team at the moment, I'm not really optimistic that will be the case. So we're going to have to really start thinking about how we're going to deal with this, because it's on its way.
What if they file for asylum or refugee status in Canada? Would that system change, you think?
Oh, it's already overloaded. So you're going to be finding a whole bunch of new people in here claiming asylum status when they get to the country. Because of our international agreements, we have to accept them. And the question is, how long will it take us to process them to determine actually if they are legitimate asylum seekers, if they're legitimate refugees, as we would classify them as. And that could take a considerable period of time, and all the while through putting more pressure on those resources we were talking about before.
We may, in Canada, face a similar issue as the Eastern or Western Europeans did. Germans, for example, when migrants came in from the Middle East, they had to resort to last-minute accommodation for a lot of these people in private homes, for example. What is the public polling on in this matter? Have you done any polling on whether?
Yeah, we've done a fair amount of polling on this issue, and there are a certain number of Canadians that would be sympathetic to finding maybe unconventional ways to accommodate people who are through no fault of their own. They would view it at left in the lurch by the U.S. government and having to find their way into the country. But I do think that the majority of Canadians. Compassion will be there for a short period of time, but it's in a limited supply.
And popularity for the current administration in office in Canada. Can you comment on polling and the level of popularity there?
Well, there is no popularity. I mean, the gap between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party in Canada now is, depending on the poll that you look at, anywhere between 15 and 24 points. Let's say on average 20 points. That's one difference between Canada and the United States right now. There was it was a very close election in the United States. When you look at popular support for the two candidates, separated by maybe a couple of points. In Canada, the separation is 20 points. If there was an election held tomorrow, the Liberal Party would suffer an historic loss. The government doesn't seem to have the capacity at the moment to be able to change the public view. Public views are very settled on the government. So essentially all we're doing right now, David, is just watching days go by on the calendar. Nothing's changing.
What has led the Liberal Party to this current situation? What are Canadians most upset about, immigration aside?
Number one issue that really concerns them is the cost of living and their ability to actually make it from day to day. But it's really a subset of another bigger problem. And it's what the Liberals promised back in 2015, which was they were there for the middle class and those who aspired to join the middle class. At the moment, that's the group of the population that the Liberal Party is having the hardest time with. It's the disappointment that the middle class, the aspirational middle class, is feeling. In particular, younger members of that group who feel that the type of life that they have aspired to is no longer going to be available to them. So social progress in Canada, from the perspective of voters, is stalled, particularly that key group of middle-class voters. And as a result of that, the Liberals need them to win, particularly the ones that live in car commuting suburbs, surrounding our major cities, and they have turned decidedly to the Conservative Party. So the Liberal Party, there's no demographic group where they lead. There's no geography in the country where they lead at the moment. There's no place to come back from.
The inflation rate has spiked in Canada like it did in the US. And I think speaking to a lot of economists, many of them told me that one of the reasons why Trump won was because of the really high inflation rate that persisted throughout the last couple of years. So you're right there. The other issue, of course, is the housing affordability issue that is really accentuated because Canada is a smaller country than the US. And so, San Francisco's expensive, New York's expensive, but we only have, 3-4 major cities that account for a majority of the population. All of them are unaffordable. What can be done about this?
Well, it is interesting on the question of affordability. It's not really just the question of affordability or the presence of houses. I mean, there actually isn't a housing crisis in Canada. There's a housing crisis in a number of places in Canada, but you can still buy affordable houses if you want to go to communities that are somewhat in decline in rural and small town parts of the country. You can still get affordable houses, but it's the places that people want to live where the issue is. And the way that people who advocate on the housing front really seem to focus is on the number of houses from the perspective of can we build lots and lots and lots of dense housing, apartments, that kind of thing. The problem that we've got in Canada is that's not what people are looking for. It's not about low income housing. Yes, there is an element that's that. It's aspirational middle class homes in places in which people are going to feel like they're going to have their own four walls, their own patch of grass, and the place that they're going to own on their own and be able to raise their families. That's the thing that that's what's moved housing up the list of priorities for Canadians. It's not can I find a box in the sky in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver. But people settle for that kind of living to a large respect. In a large respect, what they really want to be able to do is have a house in the neighborhood maybe that they grew up in, or the neighborhood that they imagined that they could raise their family in, that they no longer feel that they can have access to. So this is not necessarily about downtown housing, although there's a ton of conversation about that. It's really more about suburban middle class housing. That's what people are looking for. This isn't about the missing middle. Triplexes and, sixplexes or whatever else you want to call it, in laneways in downtown Vancouver. Yeah, there are people who want to have that, but that's not driving the demand right now. They're driving the public concern. It's access to those other types of houses that people feel that they're not that it's just simply not available to them at a price that they can afford.
On that note, I'd like you to please take a look at this clip from Parliament. This is Poilievre responding to Trudeau. Just take a listen. I'd like you to respond, please.
We're leveraging transit funding to build more homes. We're launching a housing design catalog. He's announcing a catalog every month. Give him a round of applause. Half a bar. Oh, they can't afford a home. You might end up in a tent. Your rent is double, but hey, you've got a brand new catalog. Mr. Speaker, the question was, will he build 550,000 new homes, yes or no?
Conservative Party is hammering home the point that there is not enough housing supply, to your earlier point. Anyway, what's your response to that?
Well, I think, Mr. Poilievre is a master of the of question period, but when he does become prime minister, he's going to be faced with exactly the same kind of issues. So it'll be interesting to see what his solutions are. So far, basically what he said is we're going to build a lot of houses. Whether they're the kinds of houses that people want or not is another question. And that he's going to eliminate the gatekeepers that are responsible for not allowing this to proceed, particularly in cities and municipalities. So whatever that means, I guess that's going to be their policy. But the question is still going to be on the table. Can you create middle-class housing in sufficient numbers? It's at the correct price for aspirational members of the middle class to find the kind of home they feel that they are entitled to, not a number in a box in an apartment building. Some people want to go to that, but most people, the reason housing has moved up is because they're looking for another kind of housing. And I noticed that Mr. Poilievre wasn't really specific about what it was he was going to be building. He's just giving out a big number, 550,000. If it's 550,000 500 square foot apartments, nobody's going to be pleased.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Now, the market itself is a balancing force. If you have too many people wanting homes, price goes up. Not enough, price goes down. Right now, I live in Vancouver. I'm looking at realtor catalogs that were sent to the mail. The market is down 8% downtown Vancouver. Inventory is also down. Sales volume also down. This is during a rate cutting environment. So what is going on right now? Do you have any data and insights to share?
Yeah, well, I think number one thing is that people have not come back down post the pandemic to the degree that we thought they were going to come back downtown. I think we've talked about this before, David. I think one of the bigger issues that we're going to be dealing with is revitalizing the downtowns of our cities in an environment in which people, the idea that they're going to be working 7 day or 5 days a week, 7.5 hours a day downtown is no longer going to be the norm.
Okay, so we are going to see then, going back, I want to link back to your earlier conversation with me earlier in the summer about the population decline. If we're not going to have more immigrants, in other words, if the government is looking for ways to restrict the number of immigrants coming in, that still has the same question of whether or not we're going to get the same level of growth as before if the population itself is not growing natively with births. Like I said earlier, 97% of the population growth in 2023 came from immigration. So basically, what's next for the Canadian economy is my bigger question.
Yeah, we're going to go through the same things that they're going through in Asia and particularly in Western Europe, right? Western and Eastern Europe right now, where our population is going to peak and it's going to start decline. I mean, there's this dream that Canada can have, accommodate a population of 100 million. We'll never get there. We're going to have a hard time getting to 60 or maybe even 50. Particularly now that they've cut back on immigration, it's really going to be challenged because our birth rate is going to set another record low again next year. Probably going to be down around 1.2, which is, around the level of Japan. And Japan loses about 1 million people from its population every year.
Okay, so then let's turn this around. If the number of people being born in Canada isn't sufficient to reach a fertility rate of 2, then at some point the government needs to change its immigration policy to allow more people to come in sustainably. What do you think is the path forward then? What is the right balance for you?
Well, in the short to medium term, that really is the only solution that exists. I mean, every one of the other public policy interventions that relate to making it easier to become parents or to take care of children has a negligible effect on fertility rates. I mean, they're good for a whole lot of reasons, but if you think you're going to reverse the decline in fertility by having even free childcare to everybody who wants it, or even paying bonuses to people to have kids, there's no country in the world that's tried all of those things that's actually reversed it. So you're really in the short to medium term are really only looking at immigration, which is the real tragedy, David, of what's going on right now and with the mismanagement of what's happened over the space of the last few years, because we did have a consensus on being able to smooth out a bit of the population decline and particularly the aging that's going to be taking place over the next while. But mismanagement has created a situation in which public opinion is turned against it. And you do need to have public consensus in order to accommodate the level of immigration that we would need to smooth out our aging and inevitable decline. And that the government has allowed that to be squandered is really a difficult problem.
What's the public polling right now and public opinion on job prospects? How are Canadians feeling about wages, job prospects, and employment overall?
Generally speaking, they think the economy is not doing well. But normally when you talk to people about what are the signs that you look for the economy doing well, it usually relates to unemployment. And at the moment, Canadians do not have unemployment ranked in the top 5 issues facing the country today. So to the extent that they, by the way, regard the economy right now, it's about 70% of Canadians describe the economy as bad, which is around a record high. The reason for that is basically cost of living, not related to employment.
The cost of living is unlikely to go back down to pre-pandemic levels. It's not like, prices are usually sticky upwards. Once they've come up, they don't usually go back down for most things. So the other side of the equation is wages have to be up in order to compensate for that. Do you see anything that the government or perhaps the private sector can do that could be a positive for wages in the next couple of years?
Yeah, well, labor demand, in the scenario that we're talking about right now is obviously not going to decline. And unless we find another way to maintain our productivity or increase our productivity, other than hiring people or maybe upskilling them, there's going to be pressure on wages because there's simply going to be fewer people who are going to be part of the labor pool, and that's as a result of large numbers of people retiring and moving out. So we're probably going to have a conversation about retirement. This is something that we've talked about before. I mean, people are living a lot healthier longer. I mean, why should we sort of arbitrarily think that they should be retiring around the age of 65? And there's a lot of people who still want to work. Some people in that group probably still have to work. So we're going to have an issue with that. But yeah, there's going to be a big demand for labor going forward, and which is going to lead to big push on things like artificial intelligence and other things to try and fill that productivity gap. But one of the short-term issues is going to be pressure on wages, and we're seeing that in terms of all the strikes that are happening as we speak, or have happened most recently, particularly in areas like the transportation sector, and now at the moment with the post office. We're going to see pressure on wages for sure.
Finally, I like to talk about public opinion on the trade wars, the ongoing trade wars with China. This is a list of steel and aluminum products from China that will be subject to a 25% surtax. I'm not going to go through the entire list. This is from the Government of Canada's website. Effective October 22nd, 2024. What is the general public's opinion on tariffs on China? And of course, as you understand, there could be retaliatory tariffs from China on Canadian goods as a result.
Yeah, Canadians are not keen on China and haven't been for some time. So the government moving to deal with what they would describe as predatory trade behavior from the Chinese government will be seen as a good thing by Canadians. Now, are they thinking about what that does to inflation, or are they thinking about what that does to costs in their own personal lives or their access to goods that would be provided out of the Chinese marketplace? No. But China as a state actor is a negative in Canada at the moment.
And do you think this relationship between China and Canada could change under a new conservative government?
Highly doubtful. And if anything, the antagonism between China and the conservatives will probably be more than it is between China and the liberals. Stephen Harper was not a big China fan. I don't think Pierre Poilievre and the members of his caucus are big China fans. The liberals tended to have more of an open mind about China. I mean, Pierre Trudeau went to China before Richard Nixon went to China. And was one of the first people in the West, and particularly obviously in North America, to start dealing with the Chinese. So I think the Liberals originally had a positive view of expanding the economic opportunities that existed in China, but the Conservatives not so much. Now, it'll be interesting given that the Conservative government is going to owe an awful lot to the Western provinces, in particular our Western oil and gas producing provinces. And they probably look at China as an important potential market. So maybe that will cause them to rethink some aspects of this policy. But generally speaking, I don't think that China should expect that it's going to get a better reaction from the Poilievre conservatives than they had from the liberals under Justin Trudeau.
Final question. We've talked about American immigrants moving to Canada under the deportation of Trump. What about the other way around? So take a look at the stat here. What is a Canadian brain drain? Why is it happening? Brain drain is a practice of workers obtaining their education in Canada, then leaving for employment elsewhere, typically the U.S. Each year, Canada loses approximately 0.7% of its population to the U.S. Now, when I was in school, a lot of the smartest kids did move to the U.S. For work. This was in finance, and I think the joke persists that if you can't make it to Wall Street, you stay on Bay Street. Anyway, is that joke a reality still today? I mean, have you done public polling on whether or not Canadians feel better about work prospects domestically versus whether or not they will want to move for better work prospects internationally?
No, we haven't done a lot of polling on that. In fact, what we tend to find is that in Canada and the United States first, Canada, in the top 2 or 3, tends to be a destination for people to go to. Maybe not the best and brightest in the financial sector and on Wall Street, but when you take a look and canvass the world, Canada is an attractive place for a lot of people to move to. I think that anecdotally, at least, We all know of people who've moved to the United States in order to be able to succeed. There's a global war for talent going on right now. One of the main warriors in that combat is the United States, and they are able to offer quite a bit in terms of compensation for people who are among the best and brightest. So yeah, something Canadians have to be worried about, especially that the Canadian dollar is skimming 70 cents at the moment. Our level of taxation is what it is, and we also have to go through winter. maybe maybe there's some people who are thinking of different opportunities in a North American marketplace. So yeah, we should be worried about that.
Very good. Thank you very much. We'll follow up soon. Where can we learn more from you, Darrell, and your work?
Well, I've written a couple of books. One about the future of Canada called Next, and it's my latest book. It's come out in the last couple of years, and you can hear or you can read an awful lot about what's going to happen with the future of the Canadian economy in that book. And a lot of it's driven by demography, but there's a lot of sort of values issues and public opinion issues that are presented in there as well. So I'd encourage you to pick that up. We've already discussed Empty Planet if you want to know what's going to be going on with the global population. And also, you can keep an eye on what I publish on Canadian politics. I've got a big article coming out, I think, this weekend that I wrote with somebody I write with quite often named John Ibbotson, who's one of the lead writers or the lead writer at the Globe and Mail on the future of the Liberal Party and what's going on in Canadian politics. So you can take a look at that this weekend.
Okay, great. That was Darrell Bricker, CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs. Thank you very much, Darrell, for coming on the show. We'll speak again soon.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.